Deadpan Ghosts is a horror media podcast and as such may feature discussion of mature or disturbing subject matter. A full list of content warnings for this episode can be found in the description. Hey, welcome to Deadpan Ghosts, a horror media podcast hosted by two ghoulish goofs, Vernon and their faithful co-host, Jonathan. And today we are covering the classic... what year did this movie come out?
1973.
Today we are covering the classic 1973, The Exorcist. Vernon, what did you think of this movie?
Wow. Thank you, Jonathan. Oh my lord. I have never seen this.
Right.
That is the energy that we are channeling today. I am a ghost who has just floated out of the room in which the people were haunting watch movies. And I just saw The Exorcist for the first time. Gosh.
Scary stuff.
I don't think we can hold... I don't want to hold back for people who were in my shoes yesterday, meaning people who haven't seen this movie. I think it's I can't recommend that anybody's first experience with the things we're going to talk about is us talking about it. You gotta just watch this movie.
Right. That's probably a good point. And, scary is maybe an overstatement. I think this movie has a reputation that precedes it. One of the scariest movies of all time. So they say people were fainting in the movie theaters and such. Apparently, all of that was true at the time. Today, I would say that the movie is more disturbing and uncomfortable than classically scary, perhaps. I mean, what do you think about that?
Before recording, I commune with my parents, and they were both very excited for me to watch this. My mom's response when I said that we were going to do The Exorcist was like, I think you're old enough. As a ghost adult
Right.
that I am. And she tells of this story where she was like a kid and her dad takes her older sister to the movies to see this. And they both come back traumatized and embarrassed to have seen it together.
Oh.
And my dad was like a hair younger at the time and in like third grade did not see this movie and has never seen this movie. At the time, he tells that the rumor was that Linda Blair, the actress who plays Reagan, was not allowed to see the movie. That was like the popular urban legend.
Well, I don't know if I believe that. Reagan is, I believe, Linda Blair, she's playing younger than she really is. A little bit. Reagan is supposed to be 12 in the movie, right? And
yeah.
Linda Blair, I believe, was 15 or 16 when she filmed The Exorcist, which does, I don't think it makes it that much better, really, because the way this movie is constructed, it has still a minor doing some really shocking and kind of graphic stuff, wouldn't you say?
I would.
Yeah,
I would.
I think today that's one of the more disturbing and uncomfortable aspects of the movie. Time has not been kind to some things in the movie. Some of the makeup that they have on Linda Blair looks pretty silly today, and I think it's specifically because we've seen so many better versions of that possessed look. But, so this movie is a demon possession movie, right? And this will be our first foray into a horror movie that doesn't have anything to do with ghosts. And I thought that we might go ahead and do The Exorcist here, because there are a lot of movies out there that kind of play around with the idea of maybe it's a ghost, and then it turns out to be a twist that it's a demon instead. I wanted to kind of undercut that before we got to it and cover a movie that is pretty much straightforward about being a possession horror film, right?
Yes, yes. Very, I'm quite affected. I feel like image-wise, this movie depicted a demon in just like a shot or two.
Yeah.
Maybe 3 flashes, real moments that were one of the most effective bits of the movie.
Right, and they're completely silent jump scares. That really works.
Yeah. I love the design of whatever that is. It was like one of the most scary things I've ever seen. The eye, like it looked like a mime almost, is kind of it would look very, I don't know, artistic, like expressionistic, and not, yeah, that's like the movie is aged in that way, in that I look at it more as like an art piece instead of being afraid of like the
right.
Well, it was scary. The mom, my emotions being channeled through her.
Well, there are a lot of human fears that go into this movie. I think that's some of the strongest stuff that's in it, right? Like, there's the fear of Chris McNeil, the mother, played by Ellen Burstyn in this film, is worried that maybe her daughter has a neurological problem at first, or maybe it's some kind of mental illness. And that's a real fear. And there's the fear of our parents growing old and dying alone without us near, things like that. Like real human fears.
Right. The other character is the priest, Damien, and he is caring for his elderly mother. Mm-hmm. And that was very affecting.
Let's put some of this into context. So
sure, I mean,
the movie opens.
We should start at the beginning, even if everyone knows, even if everyone's seen it.
Right, that's right.
The movie opens
in Iraq,
in northern Iraq.
That's right. And how did you respond to this?
With surprise,
for sure. But it all makes sense,
Well, yeah, complete paying attention and wondering what was going on. Max von Sydow, or at least I think that was him.
Yeah, that's him at the beginning.
I think he's like younger than both of the versions of himself he plays in this movie. Like in the beginning, I think he's still wearing some level of old age makeup, and at the end, he's wearing even more old age makeup.
Yeah, it doesn't look bad on him, to be honest.
Well, no, because I know him as an old man.
For sure.
So it doesn't faze me, except that it did. But it's fine. He's in the desert in a dig site, and they find something. They find, I wouldn't call it a MacGuffin, but that's the word that came to mind. It's this pendant that is of a different era than a group of artifacts that they find. And this pendant shows up throughout the whole movie through shots, and then physically in the end.
No.
I wonder.
No. I do have to correct you there.
Yeah, to explain.
That pendant is not the same pendant that Father Karras, Damien Karras, has at the end of the film, I think.
What?
Yeah. That is something that was found in the room because that is Reagan, she reaches up and pulls it off of his neck before, the ending of the movie happens. And
right.
And so they find that pendant in the room. I don't think that's the same pendant. I don't know how he would have gotten that.
Well, through a dimensional, physical, inner demon travel. He was
no.
Okay.
No. I understand.
The beginning of the movie.
I understand the confusion. I do. I thought about this for a second, and then I was like, no, I think I'm wrong. And I corrected myself, actually. But the actual MacGuffin that is found in that scene is the little figure, the green thing that he pulls out after that pendant. That's actually a little bit more important. Although the pendant does, give a clue to the origin of the figure possibly being, even older, from a different era than the other artifacts they're finding. By the way, Father Marin, Max von Sydow's character, is engaging in, something that I think is a little bit ethically not great here, which is finding artifacts in other countries to, like, collect for the Catholic Church. And this is right. This is a thing that they do, of course. You know, I'm sure none of these diggers are being paid very well for this job or anything like that.
So he finds this MacGuffin thing next to this other MacGuffin that I'm still convinced is the same thing from later.
I don't think so.
And he then goes. It like cuts to him at a restaurant, kind of outside, and he's taking some kind of. He's eating. What is he doing? Is he eating? Taking a drug? Or eating some... What is this? What?
It's a pill.
What is
he takes a little pill out of his little pill.
A pill. Yeah, you would know that from reading the book, maybe. But in the moment, I'm like, I don't know what he's doing.
Well,
afterwards, he goes on this, like, big... It looks like he's hallucinating. I thought he was taking some kind of drug.
You thought he was taking some kind of drug? That's
like a hallucinate. I didn't know what... And at the end, when he takes it... Before the big climax, I'm like, uh-oh, what's gonna happen?
Okay, well, that is heart medication, I think, is what he's taking.
That is such book facts.
Or some kind of...
For a movie viewer, it's like mystery. It's a mystery box that he opens and takes something and puts it in his mouth.
Well, no,
and it has, like, he's tripping in the desert.
You can still read between the lines, even if there's no text.
I did not.
But that's funny that you thought he was... hallucinating in the desert.
What was happening? what was
becoming...
like the clock stops and weird things are happening.
Yes.
What's happening?
So Father Marin, he sells all these items and he instantly gets better. He goes back to the dig site, like the wind's blowing in his face. He's not sweaty anymore. And he's like smiling. He's like, oh, I'm so glad I'm not sick. But then he has like this vision of kind of religious terror, and he sees this statue of a demon. I don't believe this demon's name is stated in the film, but that demon's name is Pazuzu, and
it's Pazuzu. Wow, no.
Yeah, this is something I read in the book. Of course, I read the book a long time ago. I saw the movie even before that, but the book ended up being really special to me, actually.
Oh,
as it turns out. In any case, Father Marin has this vision. The sky goes dark, and there's like a red sun, and it's just this ominous kind of feeling. And it's framed so that Max von Sydow and this statue are like standing off against each other, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I got that feeling with the statue. That was incredibly powerful and clear.
For sure.
I would say all the stuff leading up to that was super vague, and like him selling the stuff and getting better didn't read like I didn't read him getting better. I thought it was he was having a spiritual experience by going into the desert, on his last leg, basically. But that's the beginning of the movie to establish a vibe of this character's backstory, but he doesn't show up until there's 30 minutes left.
That's right.
It's mostly about... Her name's Chris, the mother?
Yeah, Chris McNeil, played by Ellen Burstyn.
Incredible. Mm-hmm. I didn't know anything about the movie. Her being like an actress was so delightful. Seeing that unfold and being delivered to me, with her having housekeepers and being in the shoot and having this party with all of these, the glitterati, etc.
Yeah, these socialites. Yeah, she's filming in Georgetown, which, is that in New York State?
I have a question mark. Georgetown? Like I know where that is. I don't know.
I'm going to use my ghostly powers to psychically.
Mm-hmm.
Georgetown is a university in Washington, D.C.
Okay, I do remember Chris talking to Reagan about, let's go tour Washington for your birthday. It's almost your birthday.
Yeah, so, right. There's several places that Chris McNeil travels between. They had a house in LA, but she said that she sold that house and she was building another one, but now she's filming this movie out in Georgetown. She's got her daughter with her, and her housekeeper, and her assistant, and her, butler/handyman. We get introduced to her daughter Reagan. They've got a very sweet relationship that's established right off the bat. then Chris McNeil's off to work to film a movie. And what what did you think of this movie scene, Vernon?
Wasn't it a anti-Vietnam protest? Like,
Yes.
get the military out of our schools?
Yeah, it
felt timely.
For sure.
It felt exactly like what you would put in a movie if you were making it now, pretending it was 1973.
I find this section of the film very interesting, actually, and I want to kind of hedge a point here.
Hedge away.
So it begins, and the scene hasn't started filming yet, but Chris comes up to the director, Burke Dennings, played by Jack McGowran, and she says, I don't understand my fucking motivation for this scene, like, what exactly am I going up there and doing this for, like, what does my character believe? And, like, he doesn't have any answers for her, because the script is not great, and the screenwriter is, like, away on holiday, so they just have to shoot what they've got and make the best of it. And so it's kind of like a hacky, pro-establishment kind of movie that they're making in this scene, where she comes up these steps, there's all these Vietnam protesters, they're like, keep the military out of our schools, and she gets up to take the megaphone from a protester, and she's basically like, hey, listen, everybody.
Yeah.
She's basically like, war is bad, but protesting is bad too. You're holding up all these students trying to go to their classes, and that's just as bad as what the military is doing in these schools. And she says a line which is so neat and interesting, like a perfect example of like the kind of line somebody says early in the movie that is meant to be tested throughout the rest of the film. She screams out of the megaphone, and of course she's playing a character in the scene, but she screams, if you want to make a change, you have to do it within the system. Basically like that.
Yeah, within the system. Interesting. Well, yeah, that is a huge theme of the movie. Trying to solve your child's problem through the usual channels and coming up horrified and empty-handed.
Yes.
We'll come to it a little later, but the way the medical field is portrayed is one of the most horrifying elements of the movie.
For sure. Yeah. It's really interesting, actually, how deep this movie gets into the science behind everything that could possibly be going on with Reagan besides demonic possession.
Yeah, I appreciated all that.
It's like,
maybe more than the demonic stuff. Way more.
It's a really interesting look into kind of the history of exorcism, how society has kind of advanced beyond the need for those kinds of things. We understand more about the mind and things like that.
Well, the other main character, Damien the priest, is also a psychologist, or
yes.
The priesthood sent him to school.
Yeah, he's a psychiatric counselor for other priests. And specifically, these are Jesuit Catholic priests that we're talking about. Which is very important because Chris McNeil goes through all these channels to try to figure out what's going on with her daughter. Eventually, they wind up suggesting an exorcism, but while a doctor is talking about it, he talks about how, he doesn't really believe in that kind of thing, but he thinks that it could work as a shock treatment.
Right, like if the patient believes it, it could work. But that's that doctor's point of view. I liked how befuddled and unhelpful doctors were portrayed. I think it was very realistic.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, that's the whole point, is that, within the system can only get you so far if you've got, an unusual problem, like in this case. But this doctor talks about how nobody really does exorcisms anymore. Nobody really believes in it, except for the Catholics, who, as he puts it, keep it in the closet as a sort of embarrassment. And this is really fascinating to me.
Yeah, interesting word usage there. In the closet. Embarrassment.
That is interesting word usage. But there's this kind of, recognition from the Catholic Church that, the secular has won out, in a sense. And the whole film is actually, in kind of a conservative way, frankly, a picture about how society is like falling, and like nobody believes in God anymore. You know what I mean?
Yes, faith being challenged.
Even the priest, Father Karras, his faith is being challenged, and he says to his boss, he says, "I don't think I'm cut out for this job. I think I've lost my faith."
Yeah, I really love the priest Damien. You know, he's smoking cigarettes and drinking, and the weight of the world feels like it's on his shoulders, and he feels like he's in the wrong place, and he can't take care of his mom. The pacing of his story is very like a book in that suddenly, you know, weeks have gone by, and his mother is, you know, degrading, you know, until she dies, and he's it all happens quite quickly.
It does kind of happen quickly in the cut, and we did watch the theatrical cut of this movie that is actually maybe something that's smoothed out by the director's cut, but overall the director's cut is worse, and I think most people agree with that assessment.
Well, I am interested in what 10 minutes can really do.
Well, you mentioned the face of the demon that pops up from time to time in this movie.
Yeah, my favorite part.
There's like 10 more of those.
10 more.
So they really rub it into the ground.
I think it was a little balanced in the one. It was pretty good at 3 or 4.
The ending is different. It's actually...
Well, let's hold on. I'm scared about... I want to know that later.
For sure.
Before everything falls apart, Regan is talking about her day and brings up meeting a man on a gray horse.
That's right.
And getting to like ride on this horse. But a man on a gray horse is like one of the signs of the apocalypse or plague or something. It's like representative of maybe death or pestilence. One of those just symbols of oncoming death, which was pretty
good symbolism.
Scary.
Yeah, you know. It's just symbolism, religious symbolism. And so Linda Blair's character Regan, she meets this, you know, pale writer. And before she talks about that, there are a lot of things leading up to her possession. So she talks about how she has a new imaginary friend named Captain Howdy, which is, you know, a really fun and joyous name.
Very common in the movies I've been exposed to recently with, you know, Poltergeist and The Shining. These entities first manifest as, you know, imaginary friends.
Yeah, in Danny's case from The Shining, it is certainly a little different, but yeah, that is a trope that you will see often, especially in possession movies. And Captain Howdy is got to be an all-timer in kind of an unassuming name that a demon will introduce itself with. Also, an Ouija board is found. This is the first time an Ouija board has been seen in a movie that we've talked about, so I think that's neat to point out.
For sure, that was crazy. You know, they move into these different houses, you can assume, I guess, or I don't know how long they've been in this place, but they just found a Ouija board. That was very suspicious.
Yeah.
I was very suspicious. You know, I didn't know if someone was going to be to blame.
Well, yeah.
Other than a demon. There was this other priest who's kind of a friend of Damien in a red sweatshirt, and he's also at the party earlier playing piano. I thought he was kind of a suspect or something. I didn't know what this movie was going to be.
Yeah. Well,
but he does factor. He's very emotionally affected at the ending.
Yeah, that is Father Dyer, played by William O'Malley. He is Father Damien Karras' friend, and he's also friends with Chris MacNeil. There's actually not much more to it than that, but I can see how, like, you would start to be suspicious of people. This movie does, like...
What's this guy doing?
Yeah, this movie raises suspicion sometimes about certain things. Like, Chris wants to know if anybody left a cross in Regan's room because she finds one under the pillow, and she goes and she asks the housekeeper, and she asks the handyman, and she asks her assistant. They're all like, no, I didn't leave that fucking cross in there. You know, they're not really sure where she got the cross. I don't think that that's ever resolved, at least not in this cut of the film.
That's interesting. No, I don't think so.
So, you know, there's some room for, like, suspicion and questioning perhaps.
Well, there's this detective character.
Yes, there is.
That is brought in because a murder or an incident, which I didn't think, was a murder. It worked on me where I didn't know what was. I didn't put the pieces together.
Right.
But the director of the movie.
Well, okay, so yes, what happens here is that like Reagan is getting worse, and at this party that Chris MacNeil has thrown, this is kind of where it's about to reach a really bad point. Reagan comes down the stairs, and there's an astronaut at this party, and the astronaut is like talking to people about going up to space and stuff, and she hasn't been around for any of that, but she looks at him and she goes, "You're gonna die up there," and then she pees herself, and it's very embarrassing, and Chris is like, "Oh, my daughter's been sick. I don't know why she would say such a thing." Takes her up to the room. Reagan continues to get worse, and they start doing all these tests on her, but her behavior is worsening and worsening. She's starting to use extremely foul language. It reaches a point where Chris MacNeil, has to go do some work. She can't be watching her daughter all the time, so she leaves her with her assistant, Sharon, played by Kitty Wynn. I really like her in this movie.
It was unclear that guy was an astronaut and that this lady was the secretary or assistant. Like, all of the people's roles.
Okay, well,
vague. No, this could have been an older daughter. At first, I how do I know?
With the astronaut, you missed the part where they were talking about Mars and how
I didn't process that.
Take me up there with you.
I guess I heard that, but yeah, she said. Yeah,
this movie does really want you to pay attention to it sometimes.
I'm the best audience. I was on. I'm taking mental ghost notes.
No, I'm not.
Come on.
I'm not. No, no criticism of you. It is.
But when she said you're gonna die up there, I was like, in the attic? Who are you talking about? I didn't know what was going on. I tried. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I've seen the movie many times. I've probably, put these things together.
And you've read the book. And you've read the words astronaut.
But it was a long time ago that I read the book. This was when I myself was around the age Reagan is supposed to be, when I was still alive.
12?
Yeah. And so I read the book. That's pretty young. But I had already seen the movie, so that's
cray-cray.
And I will say that, for a lot of the uncomfortable things that happen in this movie, what with, how I feel about working with minors in film and how that can affect them, you have to make it as safe and as comfortable as possible, I think. I think a lot of the stuff that winds up in this movie just works better in the book, in text.
Mm-hmm. I can imagine.
Yeah, rather than having to see... Even though Linda Blair is not 12, she's still quite young, and
absolutely
having to see her do some of these things is really uncomfortable, I think.
You were saying that the mom has to go out. She leaves the assistant, but the assistant has to go out too, so she calls the director.
Yeah, well, he was around, apparently, because
There's this really sweet scene earlier where Reagan is she's going to bed, and her mom, they're talking about what they're going to do for the birthday, and maybe if, Chris is into the director. It's just a really great mother-daughter scene before everything falls apart.
For sure, but there are a lot of implications, like you say, that Chris and Burke Dennings kind of have something going on. If nothing else, Burke Dennings is certainly into Chris MacNeil, right? He's coming around a lot. He's kind of lonely. And apparently Sharon leaves Reagan with Burke Dennings, and Chris comes home, and Reagan's by herself, and the window is open. And she shuts the... Terrifying, by the way, from a mother's perspective.
Right. That happens twice in the movie, and it gets colder and colder. And in the end, when the room is so cold, naturally, it's all... Yeah, I really liked the window stuff.
That stuff is really cool, yeah.
Scary.
She shuts the window. She goes and instantly is like, Sharon, what the fuck? Because Sharon has just come back with, some groceries, some medicine, I think. And Sharon's like, what? I left her with Burke. She's, trying to get that out. She's like, I guess I shouldn't have, trusted Burke. And Chris is like, I guess you shouldn't have. And they're they've just put that aside when somebody knocks on the door. I don't even know what character this is. This is just some guy. And he comes in. I guess he was at the party or a part of the film.
Was.
Yeah, he comes in and he's like, "Oh, you've heard," because Chris is already really upset because her daughter is sick. But she's like, "No, heard what?" And he's like, "Oh, you haven't heard. Burke died, like, on those steps right outside your house."
Outside.
Yeah.
I didn't even understand. It was such an insane thing to say. It was like, outside.
He says, like, on the stairs down to such and such street.
You know, it makes sense by the end of the movie with the stairs.
Yes.
But,
They don't-
at first, yeah, man, I was playing catch up this whole time, I guess.
I could agree that could be a little more clear. It just becomes clear later that the stairs run, like, right outside the house. Like, the window's right above those stairs. The window to Reagan's bedroom, of course, which it turns out that Reagan might have pushed Burke Dennings out of because, she's possessed, and this detective shows up and he starts talking to Father Karras about the death of Burke Dennings. Apparently, when they found Burke Dennings, his head was twisted completely around, which is, like, as he puts it, possible to happen in a fall, but pretty unlikely. Oh, and early on in the film, this is a thing that we forgot to talk about, there was also kind of a blasphemous desecration in the church.
Yeah, what's going on? I think red sweatshirt priest is still the bad guy.
No,
I think that's what the end of the movie is implying.
No. Okay, so that's like, no. What's being implied by the whole church desecration thing, I think it's just a part of this whole society is falling. It could be because of the demon's influence, something having to do with that,
Okay.
I think it's a coincidence that this desecration happens, frankly.
That's not how you do symbolism in storytelling.
I guess it could have been Reagan. I guess Reagan could have gone out the window and done it.
Oh my gosh.
I would have to watch the movie again to see if the timeline actually lines up there. In any case, Lee J. Cobb on the scene. Detective Lee J. Cobb, homicide.
Amazing. No notes.
That's the actor. He plays Lieutenant Kinderman. He's so great. Yeah, no notes is exactly what I would say. He talks to Father Karras, and he finds him because he's, like, running track. One of the cool things about Damien Karras is that people say he looks like a boxer.
Well, in his little apartment with his mom, there's some framed photos of a boxer. Maybe it's his dad when he was younger, or maybe it's him. But there's, boxing.
He does box. Yeah, he practices boxing.
Yeah. Being a priest who, smokes and drinks and boxes, that can punch and do violence.
And who is a psychiatrist.
He goes against, I loved him. I loved this guy.
He's an incredibly smart man, and he's losing his faith. But Lee J. Cobb talks to him about the case, and he's putting these two things together, the murder of Burke and the desecration at the church, thinks maybe it's some kind of black magic type of hullabaloo. And
we're ghosts. Hullabaloo.
That's how he would put it.
I majored in hullabaloo.
No, I'm saying that's how he would put it,
Yeah. That's true. No notes, Jonathan.
Thank you.
Keep going.
But he's basically asking Father Karras if there's anyone in the church who has some kind of psychological thing going on. Because he's the church psychiatrist, he would know if anybody with any kind of blasphemy or religious obsessions could have done this, something having to do with that. He's a great guy. I don't think Lieutenant Kinderman is the greatest detective in the world, but he's a good guy, so we like him.
Well, he goes to, then, Chris McNeil's house.
Oh, for sure.
And
he has to interrogate
interviews her.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a really good scene where she, slowly figures out that it was Reagan who most likely pushed this guy out the window. And, he's like a movie buff, the detective, and he asks her to sign an autograph really earnestly. But, as she's shuffling out the door, she's given a really great performance of coming to terms with this truth. I thought, that was really, really great. So I liked how his bumblingness compared with her, the seriousness of what was going on.
Yeah, that scene has a really cool thing where whenever Chris McNeil feels like she's being interrogated. The camera is slowly zooming in and cutting back and forth between both of their faces. And what she's realizing in this scene is that her daughter killed Burke Dennings, right? And then the camera is slowly zooming out at that point, and the pressure is off. And it's a really cool kind of mood-setting thing that I really admire every time I see it. Just the simple setup of having those tight close-up moments and then kind of a release of that tension, and we back away, you know?
Nice. I definitely thought that the filmmaking and the cinematography was fantastic.
Yes, William Friedkin is the director of this movie. He directs a lot of pretty controversial films, I would say. Some of them are kind of undisputed classics, like The French Connection. He directed another movie which we might talk about at some point called Bug, which came out in 2006.
Does it have ghosts in it?
No, so we won't talk about it for a while, but I remember seeing trailers of this movie when I was, around as a ghost in 2006.
Okay. Over the course of the movie, Reagan is like degrading.
That's right.
Physically. Like decomposing, which was quite horrifying. It happened like at a certain point. I think the movie peaks at its horror quality, and it's with a scene that involves the crucifix and some blood, lots of blood, and it was definitely like before Reagan was so decomposed and scarred up and covered in makeup, so it felt more like this was you were watching your kid do this. And it was especially what I'm not even saying what happened because it was it was the peak. And then afterward it's like Chris meets with the priest for like the first time, and she says, I wrote it down in my ghost mental notes. She said, "It's a demon or something, probably possessed." And I laughed out loud because that's kind of like what all these traumatic situations would do. You would just be straightforward, and she with the priest. She later just said like, "My daughter killed this guy."
Yeah, she says that to basically convince him to give her the exorcism because Father Karras is so science-based in his approach, because he's lacking faith in the first place. He doesn't want to do the exorcism. He wants to do everything in his power to convince Chris that Reagan needs psychiatric help. Even when he meets with her and she's fully possessed, he still doubts the actual demonic nature. Right.
Yeah, there's this really great element where he approaches Reagan and is talking to the demon, and he uses holy water. And he says, "This is holy water." And he splashes Reagan with it, and Reagan's freaking out. And in the scene, Reagan also mentions Damien's mom, who had just died, and probably some horrifying insults about her. And so, but then he comes out of the room and he's like, "That wasn't holy water. I was trying to trick the demon into kind of performing," which it did. But then how did it know about my mom? And by the end of the movie, Max von Sydow is kind of like, the demon tries to trick you.
Yeah.
And I felt like it's a real kind of like a 1-2 switcheroo with the demon pretending to be affected by the non-holy water, because if it wants to stay within Reagan, it wouldn't want you to do the exorcism. It wouldn't want you to have proof on recording. It would want to disprove it.
Exactly, yeah.
That was interesting.
Speaking of the recording, he records her because one of the protocol for even getting an exorcism approved by the church is to find evidence that the possessed person is speaking in foreign languages that were unknown to them before the point of possession, right? So he's recording some of Reagan's garbled groaning after sprinkling this fake holy water on her, and they take it back to get it translated, and the guy's like, "It's a language, all right. It's English. Listen." And he plays it backwards, and it was just English backwards.
I didn't like that, actually.
Yeah.
Backwards audio from a demon's mouth is actually took me out of it. I'm like, well, that's silly. That's
possibly
not how
some
sound works.
for sure, but maybe it works better in the book because you can like imagine the inhuman quality of it, right?
Well, that will have to be my segue I take into sound.
For sure.
Because the one bit of research, well, I did a few. A little bit of what I learned before watching this movie is that it won 2 Oscars. One was for Best Adaptive Screenplay by the person who wrote the book, and maybe somebody else.
William Peter Blatty.
The other was for sound. The end sentence.
How do you feel about that?
Well, I was I am, and I've said this before, I was a sound-sensitive person before I was a ghost. And now as a ghost, I'm even more sound-sensitive. So I was then acutely aware, this is an Oscar-winning movie for sound. I judged it pretty harshly. I kept track of the usual, high-pitch squeals to increase tension. There were only 4, and I thought they were extreme and therefore artistically, poignant, not overly done like in The Shining. I think that the piano, the really famous piano tune was great.
Cool.
The movie is totally comprehensively, foleyed. Like all the sound effects are really thoroughly covered. A lot of the audio, the screaming is, blaring and really hard to deal with, but I didn't hate it. I thought it was relatively, necessary in getting across this horrifying tale. I was pretty accepting of it.
Well, that's interesting. I'm glad to hear that, because I did think some of the sound might bother you, but I did also notice that, there's not nearly as much of that kind of squealing, kind of jump scare music that we don't like. There are a few instances, but they keep it pretty close to the chest. They don't overuse it at all.
They would cut to sound a lot. Like they would use the sound of a location to really make a cut more impactful.
Classic move.
Like a jump scare, almost. There was a lot of phone calls or doorbells suddenly going off, which, I didn't judge it as being hacky. I thought, this is kind of the blueprint. This is one of the most famous horror movies of all time. The reason people do these things is because of its impact right here. It won, so maybe I should blame it. It won the Oscar. It set the precedent.
Well,
big mistake.
I mean, something can set a precedent and other people can take that precedent and, run it into the ground, is how I feel about that, I guess.
But, it wasn't the worst movie we've watched so far for sound. Even though Reagan is constantly gurgling and like we were talking about, Pazuzu, as you said, which is a name I've heard before. Is that a popular name for the devil? Let's not even talk about it. As a ghost, me and the devil don't... get out of here.
Yeah. That's one reason we wanted to do The Exorcist right here, since we, have to put our foot down and...
My ghostly, vaporous foot.
But we want to go ahead and draw the line in the sand right here. Totally anti-demon cast. How could you not be? Pretty hard to root for a demon.
Absolutely. The movie was a little more enjoyable because it wasn't about ghosts.
Oh, yeah. It wasn't about you.
Yeah, it wasn't about me.
Different kind of spirit. There's neutral spirits and bad spirits.
The one doctor who does suggest exorcism, ultimately, he also, in his pitch, he says, a spirit, if you will. I wrote that down in my mental notes.
Still kind of in the ballpark. But back to that recording that Father Karras took that we were talking about. This is where the demon actually starts yelling out Father Marin's name, which is really interesting because not long after that, Father Karras has to get approval for the exorcist, but they don't want him to be the main exorcist because he has no experience, and they want somebody who's older, who's had experience. They land on Father Marin independently without hearing about that, kind of this Catholic leadership.
Interesting. So you're saying Reagan, Pazuzu, said Max von Sydow's character's name in the Gargles?
Yeah, it's in the subtitles.
Yeah, that sounds like book knowledge.
No, it's in the subtitles and everything.
I wasn't doing subtitles.
Well, it is pretty garbled, hard to make out.
So much so that I just felt it's not meant for me to understand. Like, I will get it. And I did. We need to bring in Max von Sydow.
Right. But Father Merrin comes onto the scene, and they talk about how he had an exorcism before. We don't even know this. This is new information at this point. But he's had an exorcism before at some point in Africa, and apparently it lasted for months, and it almost killed him. So maybe, there's some kind of implication that, like, he's actually faced this demon before. That's how it feels to me.
Yeah, in the climax, he sees a vision of the same demon statue from the beginning.
Yeah.
So I think so.
And it's really neat. Like, I don't know. This demon really has it out for this old guy. But he shows up at this house, and it's all mist. Like, all the mist has come out, and it's really cold, and it's this epic shot that's on the cover.
Yeah, it's on the cover. I would assume, like, the one thing I knew about the movie is, like, well, Max von Sydow's in it.
Yeah, he's right there.
But he's not, he's barely in the movie.
He is barely in the movie, but he has such an impactful presence in the film.
Yeah, he comes in and Damien is like, I should tell you about these multiple personalities. I think there's 3 inside Reagan. And Max von Sydow says, there is only one.
Yes, his attitude...
And I freaking loved that.
His attitude from the beginning is full on, I believe this shit. Don't you?
I got ghost chills. I wrote that down when he said there was only one.
That's so good.
30 minutes left. It was like, here we go.
For sure. And his, the way he treats Chris is completely different from the way everybody else has treated Chris. He basically comes in and, like, makes her feel completely at ease. She doesn't have to argue with him about what her daughter's going through. She doesn't have to convince him of anything. He's just there to be like, I believe you, and I'm here to do an exorcist.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm here to do an exorcism.
Yeah, before the movie, I would not be able to tell you if it was called Exorcism or Exorcist. I for sure thought it was Exorcism.
Did you really?
The Exorcism.
No
yeah,
way.
How do I know?
No way. All right.
I ain't seen this. No way.
Well, we get to the titular exorcism, right?
No, it's... Okay, you got me on that one.
And basically, like Father Merrin says...
That was so funny.
Really gotcha.
Yeah, that was a good thing. That was smart.
Thanks. So, basically... Father Merrin says, the demon is a trickster, and Father Damien Karras and Father Merrin are both starting the exorcism off. It's going about as expected, Reagan, possessed by the demon, is spitting, green pea soup everywhere.
Yeah.
Spits it across Max von Sydow's glasses. He just takes his glasses off and wipes it off. And he just keeps on rolling. He's a pro. But...
Yeah, that was very desperate. You have to keep going.
Yeah. The demon starts getting to Father Karras, though. The inexperienced one, of course. The less faithful one. And there's a moment where, like, Karras doesn't fully believe before they go into that room. But then the bed starts rising into the air and shaking while they're doing the exorcism. And you can, like, see it in his face. He's frozen. Like, he believes truly for the first time in that moment. And Father Merrin has to get him to, like, keep going with the responses because they're still doing the exorcism, right? They're still reading out of the Bible. It gets to a point where, like, it kind of calms down. Reagan's demon infesting her, like, basically goes into sleep mode. Right. We get a really iconic moment that is spoofed in Ghostbusters where Reagan floats off the bed and they're shouting the power of, may the power of Christ compels you, right? The power of Christ compels you until, like, she lowers and afterwards is kind of in sleep mode. Yeah. And in that scene, we can see the effect that real holy water has on Reagan's body when it's thrown at her. It's like an invisible, like, whip. Yeah, I saw that. Goes out and, like, whips her a leg
Yeah, it really only is highlighted that one time.
It is,
that you
for
can
sure.
tell, like, that's what's going on.
For sure. I thought it was a cool thing, though. Cool little detail. But they take a break. Father Merrin, when it calms down for a second, he turns to Father Karras and he's basically like, "You tired?" Which I thought was good.
With the setup that, like, it could take, or Father Merrin has had an exorcism take months, it's like you have to take breaks. This could take, many, many attempts at this.
Exactly.
And after that point, they kind of attempt it separately because Damien goes back in by himself and then something goes wrong.
Well, Father Merrin goes to the bathroom because he's like shaking, like his hand is shaking, and he's like rubbing his like temples. I think he's having, some problems. So he has to reach into his little pill container and take one of his pills.
The mysterious pills.
Not that mysterious, he's an old man. Most old men have got to take a pill for something.
It felt so meaningful.
The meeting basically begins and ends at this guy is about to die. This is his last exorcism.
Yeah.
And while he's in the bathroom taking his pill, trying to sort himself out, Father Damien goes into the room and is kind of like taunted to the point of losing his composure a little bit by the demon. The demon is bringing up more stuff about his mother and actually speaking in the voice of his dead mother.
Yeah.
She's like, "Dimmy,
yes,
Dimmy, why did you do this to me?" She's Italian, so
it would get me for sure.
And Father Merrin comes in while he's like screaming at Reagan. He's like, "You're not my mother!" And Father Merrin is like, "Yo, get out, bro."
Oh man.
And it's kind of sad, honestly, like watching him like walk past Father Merrin, and he's like ashamed that the demon got to him,
Yeah.
But he has a moment with Chris McNeil downstairs where she comes in and she's like, "Is it over?" And I want to take this moment to point out Ellen Burstyn is so fucking good in this movie. I also really like the priest, Father Karras specifically. He's played by Jason Miller. I don't think I've shouted out his name yet, so shout out to Jason Miller. He's really hot also.
Yeah, they're both so good.
Oh, yeah. Ellen Burstyn, fantastic. She comes out and she's like so whooped after everything she's been through in this movie. She's like, "Is it over?" And he just shakes his head. And then she's like, "Is my daughter going to die?" And then Damien looks at her and he's like, "No." And then he stands right up and he goes back into the room to give it another try. That's like a really...
that's his big arc.
Yeah, that's a really...
not letting his mom die, or so he feels, versus saving somebody.
Stepping up to the plate in a time when, somebody else needs help, basically. Yeah, and he regains his faith at the same time. Because when he goes in the room, he sees Father Merrin dead on the ground. And the best part...
Off screen.
For sure, off screen.
I was very shocked.
Yeah. The camera pans over to his fallen over body. And the best part is Reagan is just, like, sitting there, like, staring at him, like...
Yeah, no longer tied up.
No reaction.
It was scary.
Slack-jawed. Almost like, honestly, and this may not be the case, she may have killed him. Like you say, she was no longer untied. But... almost like she was surprised that he died.
Right.
She starts laughing. He's, like, pounding on Father Merrin's chest. She really, like, gets the last laugh on Father Merrin. I keep saying she. I do want to emphasize that the demon possessing Reagan is a he, just to make that clear. So
understood.
Most of the time when I'm talking about Reagan, obviously I'm talking about him, Zuzu. Father Karras, like, freaks out a little bit, honestly. Like, he immediately, like, picks up, Reagan's body and, like, throws it on the ground because, like, Pazuzu is laughing and, like, starts, like, beating on her a little bit. And I'm like, "Hey, bro, that's still, like..."
Yeah, I felt this was what the boxing stuff was there for, to set up that he was going to lose it in this moment.
For sure.
But because he started wailing on her. It was insane.
Yeah, this is not the way you want to treat a possession victim just because the demon inside of a person is a shit. You can't go.
Then, okay, so this is the big climax moment. He's got this medallion that's super significant, obviously, and she rips it off of him.
Yeah, he stops. He obviously realizes that, like, he's not doing any good. This isn't going to help her. So he screams at the demon, "Take me! Take me! Come into me!" And when Pazuzu, in Reagan's body, snatches that necklace off of him, the demon can go right into Father Karras. And there's kind of a sense that this is what the demon wanted all along. The demon wanted to kill Father Marin, and it wanted to go into Father Karras so that, as the demon put it in an earlier scene, Father Karras could be closer to him. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, you and me, or so. I remember that Pazuzu saying that.
Yeah, and so that's... I get the sense that this is kind of in his game plan. But he does. He accepts that offer. He jumps right into Father Karras, and almost for a split second makes Father Karras attack Reagan. Now that she's unpossessed, she's on the floor sobbing, right? It almost makes Father Karras attack her and, I guess, potentially kill her. But he, in a moment of incredible spiritual resistance, just goes like, "No!"
Yeah.
And, like, we see him possessed for a moment, but then, like, it's a really awkward cut where then he's not possessed anymore. He looks normal again.
Well, it was a cut, that's for sure.
It was a cut, but I still really like the moment where he screams, "No!" And what he does is he jumps out the window, taking, Pazuzu's spirit with him, essentially.
Yeah, mysteriously, wouldn't really know what happens to Pazuzu.
Well, no,
But he
Pazuzu
dies, this guy.
Yes, he dies. Father Karras dies. Pazuzu, gone back into the demon world or in hell for now, I guess.
No way. Red shirt other priest guy shows up at the bottom of the staircase that Damien just fell, and he's like giving him his last rites.
Yes.
And Pazuzu definitely went into red shirt guy. That's the only reason he was in this movie.
No,
he's at the top of the staircase at the end holding the medallion.
No.
It's like the most obvious. You don't even know what you're talking about. It's symbolism, Jonathan.
You know how it ends in the book?
Tell me.
He befriends the detective, and they walk off together, and they're, like, talking about movies. And the detective says the ending line from Casablanca, because he loves Casablanca so much. He's like, "I believe this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship," And
well, that does not support my theory.
No, and this is also in the director's cut of the film. I do think it's a worse ending, just because it's
That's the thing that makes the ending bad?
Well, I have my reasons for this. The ending, although it confused you,
I'm very confident in what I'm confused about, though.
It's a better ending for a horror film, I think, as opposed to what the ending was in the story, which is better for that, right? That's how I feel, basically. Not everybody may agree, but there's other reasons why the director's cut is considered worse. Some of the stuff that they put in there.
Yeah, tell me.
There's, like, a scene where Reagan does, like, a freaky spider walk that's really bad looking.
Okay, that is in my brain already. I have seen
the spider walk.
A walk down a staircase. Is that right?
Yeah, and you were wondering probably at some point
Where
why.
Is that?
Yeah, why isn't it in this?
She doesn't even go downstairs.
Well, I'll tell you, it's because it's silly, and in the point in the movie where they put it, it is already too far. You know what I mean? Like, this movie has a really good progression of how the possession is going. I think that's why most people feel that way, and ultimately it just looks pretty fake, and it looks like an unfinished scene. It looks like a deleted scene,
Okay. Well, that's what it is, I guess.
Yeah. So there's other reasons, but I personally like the ending of the theatrical cut better Because I feel like it is kind of making a statement about faith, right?
Yes.
And I'm not even exactly sure what that statement is, but kind of in an emotional, poetic way, the last frames of this movie speak to me. Where, like, Father Dyer is not a very important character in this movie, but he's there for Father Karras when Father Karras needs him, and he happens to be there when Father Karras jumps out the window, sacrifices himself at the end, and has his moment of redemption when Father Dyer is there to take his confession. You know, that is essentially him securing his place in heaven there at the end. Mm-hmm. And he answers Father Dyer's questions with just, like, a gesture of his fingers, because that's all he can do.
Yeah, that was really sad. I love Damien so much.
Yeah, and so, you know, there's a beautiful story about faith going on here that I think is very relatable and connectable. I don't think... well, I get your, like, suspicion and confusion. There are some suspicious and confusing things going on in this.
Let's say this red shirt Father Dyer is not the secret bad guy, and I'm not right. So,
it's a funny theory, though.
He doesn't see the proof. Like, Damien and Max von Sydow get to experience the exorcism and see it and can believe it, and their faith is restored almost without what it requires to have faith for who we're left with, which is Father Dyer, somebody who wasn't there in the room, but has to be resolved in this and figure out a way to move on.
Right.
And so that is what faith is, like having faith in these people and what they meant to you rather than what people say happened or what could have happened, you know.
And like, you know, how to go on after experiencing something like this too. You know, we don't know what exactly is in store for Regan or Chris, but they leave Georgetown. And Chris says that Regan, you know, doesn't remember any of it.
Yeah, that's a classic end of movie thing to happen.
Yeah, but then she sees the collar, you know, the priest's collar, because she, you know, has a sense that her life was saved by a priest, at least.
That's the implication.
Yeah. They leave, but not before Chris gives Father Dyer Father Karras's medallion that Regan snatched off his neck. And I don't...
Yeah, the super important medallion that was found in the middle of the desert at the beginning of the movie because of some kind of space-time continuum in the demon realm.
I don't think anything supports that.
You look it up, Jonathan. You look... The visuals, the fact that these... Okay, it's fine. It's fine.
If it's like the same medallion, I'll give you... Like, if we look at both medallions and it's the same medallion, I'll give you that, but...
We'll be detectives.
For sure. Later.
One thing I took track of was how many times Chris McNeil, the mom, took the Lord's name in vain.
A lot.
I felt like that was really intentional.
Yeah.
And it was 9. It was 9 times.
You know, she's supposed to be very secular, you know. She's not religious early on in the film. There comes a point where she's wearing, like, you know, a shawl over her head, and she starts, like, dressing kind of like a...
Almost in mourning.
Yeah, like a mourning kind of figure. Her faith is directly reflected by kind of her attire throughout the film.
Yeah, her fits go from fabulous to distraught really, really succinctly.
Yeah, some great fits in this one. With that being said, I think it's about time to wrap this up. But I want to ask you, Vernon.
Yeah.
How do you like this movie? Do you like this movie?
Well, you know, I thought I would like it the most of so many movies we've done.
Interesting.
I just felt like it was gonna be a classic. I think that it was
played straight. Ultimately, not too much that is extremely dated or looks bad.
Well,
you know, nothing looks too bad or dated as far as effects go.
You mentioned the makeup,
yeah,
kind of taking you out of it, and I would say somewhat
in the middle of the film, but at the end of the film, the makeup's actually better on Regan. I noticed.
Yeah, one thing I felt there's near the middle, she does this head turn, this neck.
Right.
twist.
Classic.
And it also happens at the end, but the first one came right after the director had fallen and gotten his neck twisted, and I felt like, if I'm in the shoes of the mom and I want my daughter to get out of this, that neck twist on Reagan felt like it was like she was a lost cause and we're never going to get out of here, or I shouldn't take this neck twist so seriously. Like, it's not real. Like, it took me out of the fear. It's like, well, is she dead now? Like, how do I come back from this neck twist? Or does it not matter? It either doesn't matter or it doesn't matter. I didn't like the neck twist.
You know what? With demons, I guess they could do funky, like, contortionist shit to the human body, even if it doesn't make total sense. Like, realistically, yes, Reagan should be dead from that neck twist, but I don't know. Supernatural stuff's going on, and so disbelief can be, left at the door, in a sense. But yeah, I feel that it took you out of the scene a little bit. But also, she's mimicking Burke Dennings in that moment. She says, do you know what she did, your daughter? And that's kind of when Chris has already sort of figured it out. But that's like the final nail in the coffin of her understanding that a demon turned her daughter into a murderer. So that's fun.
Gosh, it was not, it peaked at a certain point, like I said, like I didn't want to mention the specifics of, because it was the most horrifying thing. Let the movie have it. If you want to watch it, you can check that out. But other than, I think it deserved its classic, status. Yeah. For sure. I do have some fun dates for our section that we always do on dates, but you did say wrap it up, so maybe we don't know the fun dates.
Well, do the dates real quick.
All right. Well, this movie came out on December 26th, the day after Christmas. The perfect day to take your whole family to the theater and traumatize them. No other movie.
That's hilarious.
No other movie came out on that day because, I don't know. The mom and the detective have a birthday one day apart, so December 7th and the 8th. That's the mom and the detective. Very fun. And then Linda Blair's birthday is January 22nd, and one of the many priests in the movie, who I tried to spot when watching it because I found this fun fact before, he was also born on January 22nd. And that's the end of our dates section of the show.
Well, that's pretty neat.
It is. That was neat.
Yeah, I like these dates. I like learning these fun dates.
Thank you, Jonathan.
That's good.
Well, great job.
Thanks. You too.
We did it.
We did do it. Do you want to cut this little bit out, this in-between section out, and take us out of here?
Yes. Peace and love, everybody.
Peace and love.